Where is my son? Claire. Daniel's voice shook through the voicemail. But this time it wasn't power in his tone. It was panic. Months after signing our divorce papers with a smirk, he came back to Ashford Hall and found the front gate chained, the foreclosure notice taped to the stone pillar, and the one heir he needed nowhere to be found. He thought he had kept the estate, the name, and the legacy. What he never understood was that our son had already made the only choice Daniel could not control. The first thing my ex-husband noticed when he came back was the chain across the front gate. The second thing he noticed was the red foreclosure notice taped to the stone pillar where his family crest used to shine. The third thing he noticed was that our son was gone. Not missing in the way people whisper over police scanners, but gone in the way a person leaves when he finally understands nobody in that house was ever going to protect him. My name is Claire Whitmore. I was 38 years old when I stopped being Mrs. Daniel Ashford and became, in his words, a temporary inconvenience with sentimental attachments. I worked as a probate paralegal in Savannah, Georgia, which meant I spent my days sorting through the wreckage families leave behind when love gets mixed with money. I knew what greed looked like on paper. I just didn't expect it to sit across from me at breakfast, wearing my husband's face. Daniel signed our divorce papers on a Tuesday morning in a glass conference room downtown, smiling like he had just closed a business deal instead of ended a 16-year marriage. His lawyer slid the final page toward him, and Daniel tapped the pen twice before signing with a flourish. Then he looked at me and said, "You should be relieved. Claire, you were never built for the Ashford name anyway." I remember the sound of the air conditioner more than my own breathing. I did not cry in that conference room. I had cried enough in bathrooms, parked cars, grocery store aisles, and the laundry room behind the kitchen where no one could hear me over the dryer. I had cried when Daniel stopped coming home before midnight. I had cried when his mother, Vivian, stopped calling me her daughter-in-law and started calling me that woman Daniel married too young. I had cried when my son, Miles, stopped asking if his father would show up. Miles was 15 then. Tall, in the awkward way boys become tall before they know what to do with their hands. He had Daniel's dark hair, my gray eyes, and a quietness that worried me because I knew exactly where he learned it. In the Ashford house, silence was treated like manners. You did not talk back. You did not correct the powerful. You did not ask where the money went, why the bank called, or why strangers in tailored suits kept leaving sealed envelopes at the gate. Ashford Hall had been in Daniel's family for 4 generations. A white columned estate outside Savannah with mossy oaks lining the drive and a front porch wide enough for every lie the family ever told. Vivian spoke of it like it was a sacred inheritance. But by the time I married in, the house was already less a home than a stage. Every Sunday dinner was arranged around who deserved to sit closest to Vivian. Every Christmas card was about appearing stable. Every room smelled faintly of polish and debt. The strange thing about old houses is that people think they belong to whoever talks loudest about legacy. I learned early that legacy can be mortgaged, refinanced, borrowed against, and quietly eaten alive by men who call themselves providers while someone else pays the electric bill. Daniel liked people to believe he managed his family's investments. In truth, his management mostly involved avoiding calls, blaming market conditions, and using charm where numbers should have been. For years, I kept parts of that family from collapsing because I knew how to read documents he refused to open. I caught tax notices before penalties doubled. I found missing insurance payments. I wrote polite emails to creditors Daniel had insulted over the phone. I sat at the kitchen island after midnight with spreadsheets, receipts, and black coffee while he slept upstairs in the guest room and told everyone I was too anxious to enjoy success. Vivian saw what I did, but she never thanked me. Gratitude was not a language she respected unless it flowed toward her. She would float into the kitchen in silk robes and say things like, "A good wife protects her husband's dignity." What she meant was that I should keep patching holes without admitting the roof was gone. When I asked Daniel to be honest with her, he laughed and said, "My mother doesn't need details." She needs confidence. The woman he eventually left me for understood that part of him perfectly. Her name was Serena Vale. Though Vivian always said it with a softness she never wasted on mine. Serena was 32. Polished. Widowed according to her own version of events. And very skilled at making helplessness look like refinement. She entered our lives through one of Daniel's charity boards. Wearing cream dresses and speaking gently about second chances. Within 6 months, she knew where Vivian kept the good silver. At first, Daniel called her a friend of the family. Then a consultant. Then someone who understood pressure. By the time I found her pearl earring under the passenger seat of his car, she had already been invited to lunch at Ashford Hall twice while I was at work. Vivian told me not to embarrass myself with jealousy. Daniel told me I was becoming bitter. Serena touched my arm one afternoon and said, "Some women are better at building peace than demanding proof." That became the sentence I heard in my head whenever I walked into a room and conversation stopped. Some women are better at building peace. As if peace meant stepping aside while another woman rearranged your marriage in your own home. As if proof was vulgar when everyone already knew the truth. As if my refusal to disappear quietly was the real problem. Not Daniel's lies or Vivian's hunger for a daughter-in-law who made the family look expensive again. The divorce was not sudden. No matter how Daniel tried to frame it. It came after months of cold dinners. Closed doors. And Vivian reminding Miles to be respectful to his father's happiness. It came after Daniel moved into the East Wing and Serena started leaving her gloves on the foyer table. It came after I found Miles sitting on the back steps one night, holding his father's old baseball glove. And he asked me if a person could be replaced before they were gone. I should have left that night. I know that now. But women like me are trained to make leaving look clean before we allow ourselves to move. I wanted documents copied. Bank statements saved. School records secured. Birth certificates in my own possession. I wanted Miles safe. I wanted proof of what Daniel had been hiding. Not because I planned revenge, but because I had worked in probate long enough to know that powerful families become most dangerous when their image starts bleeding. The papers Daniel signed that Tuesday gave him what he wanted on the surface. He kept Ashford Hall. He kept the antiques Vivian claimed were heirlooms even when half of them had auction stickers under the drawers. He kept the country club membership, the family cars, and the illusion that he had chosen freedom instead of financial ruin. I kept my car, my retirement account, my grandmother's quilt, and primary custody of Miles, which Daniel agreed to because parenting had never impressed him in public. His smirk came after the custody paragraph. He leaned back and said, "Don't make him hate me, Claire. Boys need their fathers." I looked at him for a long second, thinking of missed birthdays, forgotten games, and the night Miles waited on the porch until 10 because Daniel promised to take him fishing. Then I said, very calmly, "I won't have to make Miles feel anything. You've been teaching him for years." That was the first time Daniel's smile faltered. But only for a breath. Then Serena squeezed his shoulder from behind his chair, though she had no reason to be inside that conference room at all, and whispered, "Let it go, darling." Vivian sat beside her with her purse folded in her lap, watching me as if I were a stain, finally being treated. When I stood to leave, Vivian said, "Claire, do try not to poison the boy against his inheritance." I turned at the door because that word stopped me. Inheritance. Not father. Not home. Not family. Inheritance. That was the only version of love the Ashfords understood clearly. I looked at Vivian's perfectly set face and realized she was not afraid of losing me. She was afraid Miles might one day understand what they had done to him. To me. And to the house they worshipped more than any living person inside it. 3 weeks after the divorce, Miles and I moved into a 2-bedroom rental above a bakery near Forsyth Park. The floors slanted, the bathroom window stuck in summer, and every morning at 5, the smell of bread rose through the vents like a promise we had not earned yet. Miles chose the smaller bedroom because it faced the street. He said he liked hearing people walk by. I think he liked knowing the world kept moving without asking permission from Ashford Hall. For a while, Daniel performed fatherhood through text messages. He sent Miles links to articles about discipline and success. He invited him to dinner, then canceled when Serena had migraines or Vivian needed him at some event. He mailed a birthday card with a check inside, and no handwriting except his signature. Miles deposited the check into his college fund and never mentioned it again. I watched my son become polite in the way wounded people become polite when they stop expecting anyone to show up. Then the first bank envelope arrived at my office by mistake. It was addressed to Daniel Ashford, care of my old legal contact information from years before, and stamped urgent in red. I should have returned it unopened. And technically, I did. But not before seeing the sender's name, the loan number, and the words default notice through the little plastic window. My stomach tightened. Not from surprise, but from recognition. The house was finally making the sound I had heard inside the walls for years. I told myself it was no longer my problem. I told myself Daniel had signed with a smirk. Vivian had chosen her pride. And Serena had wanted the keys badly enough to take the rooms with all their cracks. But then Miles came home from school, dropped his backpack by the door, and said, "Grandmother called me today." He did not look scared. That frightened me more. He looked tired, as if some old bill had finally come due in his name. Vivian had told him Ashford Hall belonged to him someday, and that family loyalty required sacrifice. Daniel had told him a real man did not abandon his bloodline because his mother was upset. Serena had told him, softly, that his father was under terrible pressure and a kind son would visit more often. 3 adults had circled my child with words like duty, legacy, and forgiveness. And not one of them had asked if he was sleeping. That night, after Miles went to bed, I opened the metal firebox I kept beneath my closet floorboards. Inside were copies of every document I had saved before leaving mortgage notices, unpaid tax letters, emails Daniel forgot to delete, appraisals, and one sealed envelope from Daniel's late father, Arthur Ashford. Arthur had given it to me 6 months before he died, pressing it into my hand in the library while Daniel and Vivian argued upstairs. For Miles, he had said, not for them. I had never opened that envelope because grief makes certain promises feel sacred. But that night, with Vivian's voice still in my son's phone and the bank circling Ashford Hall, I set it on my kitchen table under the yellow light. My hands were steady when I broke the seal. Inside was not a love letter, not a confession, not some dramatic family secret. It was a notarized document, folded once, with Miles's full name printed in the first paragraph. By the time I finished reading, I understood why Vivian had been watching my son like a locked door. I understood why Daniel had been so eager to keep the estate in the divorce. And I understood something else, too. Daniel had not just signed away his wife with a smirk. He had signed without knowing the only true heir to Ashford Hall had already been protected from him. The document Arthur left was not dramatic because truth rarely looks dramatic when it is printed on legal paper. It was a copy of an irrevocable family settlement, signed 2 years before his death, naming Miles Arthur Ashford as the remainder beneficiary of Ashford Hall. Daniel was not the owner in the way he had claimed during our divorce. Vivian was not the keeper of legacy. They had control, appearance, access, and a long hallway of portraits. Miles had the future interest they had all been pretending it did not exist. I read it 3 times. Slowly. Because one mistake in that kind of document could change everything. Arthur had placed the estate into a preservation trust after Daniel's gambling debts first surfaced. Though the family called them investment losses, Daniel was allowed to live there and manage basic upkeep. But he could not sell the property, pledge it beyond certain limits, or drain estate accounts without trustee approval. The trustee listed was an old banking attorney named Samuel Pike, whose signature I recognized from probate filings at work. The problem was not the document itself. The problem was what Daniel had done around it. The foreclosure notice meant either he had found a lender careless enough to accept a clouded title, or he had failed to pay tax obligations tied to the property while telling everyone the estate was secure. Neither option surprised me. Daniel had always believed consequences were for people without the right last name, and Vivian had always believed reality could be corrected by refusing to lower her voice. I did not call Daniel that night. I did not call Vivian. I did not text Serena and ask whether her peace building included reading foreclosure filings before moving her wardrobe into my old bedroom. I placed Arthur's document back inside the envelope, scanned every page twice, and saved copies in 3 places. Then I sat at the kitchen table until after midnight, listening to the bakery downstairs begin its first batch. While the smell of yeast rose around me like something alive, the next morning, I asked Miles if he wanted pancakes before school. He looked at me over his cereal, suspicious because I only made pancakes on birthdays or emergencies. What happened? He asked. That was Miles. He had learned to read the weather inside people. I told him his grandmother had crossed a line by calling him about family loyalty. And from now on, every call from Ashford Hall went unanswered unless I was in the room. His shoulders dropped a little. Relief can look very quiet. For the next few weeks, the pressure came in layers. Daniel sent messages that sounded almost fatherly if you ignored the timing. He wanted Miles to visit for dinner, then for a weekend, then for a man-to-man talk about responsibility. Vivian mailed a handwritten note on thick cream stationery, reminding Miles that his grandfather had expected courage from Ashford men. Serena sent a birthday gift 3 months early, an engraved watch with the initials M.A. On the back. As if possession could be polished into affection, Miles put the watch back in its box and set it on the kitchen counter. Can we return it? He asked. There was no anger in his voice. And that made me ache. Anger would have been easier. Anger burns outward. What Miles carried was a colder thing. The kind that settles behind the ribs when a child realizes adults are not confused. Not busy. Not wounded in some noble way, but choosing themselves again and again. I contacted Samuel Pike from my office phone during lunch, keeping my voice professional, because professional was the only armor I trusted. He remembered Arthur. He remembered me. When I mentioned the envelope, there was a silence long enough for me to hear him close a door. Claire, he said. I wondered when you would call. That sentence told me more than any document. People had known. They had waited. And while they waited, Daniel had been standing on a porch he did not fully own, calling it his birthright. Samuel asked me to bring the papers in person. I took half a personal day and drove to his office. A narrow brick building near Wright Square with brass lamps and no receptionist under 40. He reviewed the pages without surprise, then opened a file so thick the edges had softened. Inside were letters Arthur had sent him in the last year of his life. Some were formal, some were not. One said, in shaky handwriting, Vivian will call this betrayal. It is not. It is protection. Arthur had understood his family with a clarity that comes too late to save everyone. He had watched Daniel charm lenders, hide losses, and confuse entitlement with destiny. He had watched Vivian excuse him because admitting her son was reckless would mean admitting her own pride had fed it. So he had protected the estate's future by attaching it to the only person he believed might grow up free of them. Miles. My son. Who still kept his shoes lined up by the door because chaos made him anxious. Samuel explained the danger plainly. The trust existed, but parts of its administration had been neglected after Arthur's death. Daniel had failed to provide annual accounting. Vivian had interfered with notices. Certain taxes had been paid late from personal accounts instead of estate funds, creating confusion Daniel could exploit. The foreclosure was tied to a private loan Daniel had taken against surrounding acreage by representing himself as having broader authority than he possessed. It was not clean. Greed rarely is. Can they take the house? I asked. Samuel folded his hands. Not without a fight. But if nobody asserts Miles's interest, they can make a terrible mess before he turns 18. There it was. The sentence that turned concern into responsibility. Miles was not just being guilted into visiting his father. He was being positioned. If Daniel could get him close, emotional, confused, or persuaded. There were signatures he might someday seek, statements he might twist, loyalties he might manufacture, before the law gave my son a stronger voice. I drove home in silence. Past the squares and old brick walls, tourists photograph, without seeing the rot behind some of the gates. I thought about every time Daniel had accused me of being suspicious. Every time Vivian said family matters should stay within family. Every time Serena looked at me with gentle pity. As if I were too plain to understand elegance. What none of them understood was that I had spent half my adult life watching families destroy themselves because nobody wanted to be that evening. I told Miles enough truth to protect him without making him carry adult weight. I told him his grandfather had left protections in place for him, and his father's family might try to pressure him because of it. He listened without interrupting, his face still in that careful way teenagers use when they are trying not to scare their parents. Then he asked, "Does Dad know?" I said. "He knows enough to be dangerous and not enough to be careful." Miles nodded. And for a moment, he looked much older than 15. "I don't want the house," he said. "Every time I think about it, I just remember people watching me to see whose side I was on." I wanted to tell him a house could be reclaimed, that walls could be washed, that porches could hold different conversations. But I did not. A parent's hope can become another kind of pressure if offered too quickly. So I said, "Then we protect your right to choose." Daniel's next move came through school. He arrived one Friday afternoon without telling me. Wearing a navy blazer and that public smile people mistook for warmth. Miles saw him from the hallway and froze. The receptionist called me because I had already updated the pickup list after Vivian's phone call. By the time I reached the school, Daniel was standing outside the office, saying, "I'm his father," in a tone that made the word father sound like a legal weapon. I did not raise my voice. That mattered. People like Daniel love nothing more than a woman they can describe as hysterical later. I walked up, stood between him and the office door, and said, "You are not on today's pickup authorization." His eyes flicked toward the receptionist, then back to me. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I'm trying to spend time with my son," I answered. "Then email me, like the custody agreement requires." He smiled thinly and lowered his voice. "You're making a mistake." There it was again. The old Daniel. Not shouting. Not threatening in a way anyone else could easily quote. Just pressing his thumb against the bruise he assumed was still there. For years, that tone had made me explain myself. This time, I took out my phone and said, "I'm documenting that you attempted an unscheduled pickup after repeated unwanted contact regarding family property." His face changed. Not much. But enough. Men like Daniel hate being written down. Miles came out with the assistant principal beside him. He did not look at his father first. He looked at me. And I gave him one small nod. He walked to my side without speaking. Daniel watched him as if he had been publicly insulted by a child refusing a gift. "Miles," he said, "don't let your mother turn you against your own blood." Miles swallowed. Then said, "I'm not against you. I'm just tired." It was the saddest sentence I had ever heard a child say. That weekend, Vivian called from a blocked number. I answered only because Samuel had told me to keep records of direct pressure. Her voice came through smooth and cold. "Claire, you are confusing temporary custody with moral authority." I turned on the call recorder app Samuel recommended and set the phone on the table. Vivian continued. "Arthur was sentimental at the end. Whatever papers you think you have, Daniel is the head of this family. That boy belongs where he was born." I looked across the table at the empty chair where Miles usually did homework and felt something in me harden cleanly. Not rage. Not panic. A line. "Miles belongs to himself," I said. Vivian laughed softly, as if I had said something childish. "Children do not belong to themselves. They are raised into obligation." That sentence became the second anchor of the story. Daniel had his smirk. Serena had her peace. Vivian had her obligation. Together, they had built a religion out of taking. 2 days later, Serena appeared at the bakery downstairs. I found her standing near the pastry case, pretending to admire almond croissants while wearing sunglasses indoors. She looked expensive and tired, which is a dangerous combination in women who marry men for security and discover the roof leaks. "Claire," she said, with that soft voice sharpened just enough. "Can we talk like adults?" I almost laughed. People who ask for adult conversations usually mean they want you to accept a child's version of accountability. We sat at a small table by the window. Serena removed her sunglasses and revealed swollen eyes, though whether from crying or strategy, I could not tell. She said Daniel was under unbearable stress. She said Vivian was not well. She said foreclosure notices were humiliating for a family with history. Then she leaned forward and said, if Miles simply acknowledged his father's role publicly, it could calm the lender. It would show unity. There it was. Not love. Not healing. Optics. I asked what acknowledgement meant. Serena's mouth tightened before she answered. A statement. Maybe. A family photo. Something saying he supports Daniel's leadership of the estate. I stared at her, amazed by the elegance of the trap. They did not need Miles to sign anything yet. They needed to build a record. A public posture. Evidence that he accepted Daniel as proper manager. So later, when the paperwork grew uglier, they could point to a smiling boy on a porch and call it consent. No, I said. Serena blinked, as if the word itself had offended her. Claire, don't be vindictive. This isn't about you. I leaned back and folded my hands the way Samuel did when explaining unpleasant facts. You're right. It's about Miles. That is why the answer is no. Her face changed then. Just enough for me to see what lived underneath the cream dresses and careful sorrow. Not desperation. Resentment. She had expected my pain to make me messy. And my calm made her angry. Before she left, Serena placed one manicured hand on the table and said, Daniel will not let you keep his son from him. I looked at her hand, then at her face. Daniel kept himself from his son for years. I said, I'm just no longer helping him pretend otherwise. She stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Everyone in the bakery looked over. For once, I was not embarrassed. Let people look. Shame only works when you agree to carry it. The consequences came fast after that. Daniel filed a motion, claiming I was interfering with visitation. Vivian told mutual acquaintances that I was unstable and using Miles as revenge. Serena posted a photo of Ashford Hall at sunset with the caption, Some legacies survive bitterness. Women from the country club who had ignored me for months suddenly viewed my social media stories. A former neighbor sent a heart emoji, and nothing else. That is how polite society watches a house fire without smelling like smoke. I answered through proper channels. Samuel coordinated with a family attorney he trusted. I provided call logs, school incident notes, Serena's visit, and Vivian's recorded sentence about children and obligation. I also provided the trust documents. Not to attack, to establish context. That distinction mattered. I was not trying to punish Daniel for leaving me. I was trying to stop him from using our son as scaffolding for a collapsing house. The first hearing did not end with thunder. Most real turning points do not. The judge reminded both parties to follow the custody agreement and ordered that no one contact Miles directly regarding inheritance, property, or estate matters. Daniel looked offended by the idea that his conversations with his son required boundaries. Vivian did not attend, but I imagined her hearing the order and calling it vulgar. Serena sat behind Daniel, hands clasped, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light like a small warning. Afterward, Daniel approached me in the hallway. His lawyer tried to stop him, but Daniel had always mistaken impulse for courage. You think papers make you powerful now, he said. His voice was low, but I could see the vein in his temple. I thought of the conference room where he signed away our marriage. I thought of his smirk. Then I said, "No. I think papers make lies harder to dress up." He stared at me as if I had spoken in a language he used to own. For nearly a year, we lived inside that tension. Miles went to therapy on Wednesdays. He joined the robotics club. He learned to make omelets. He grew another inch and started running in the mornings before school, claiming it cleared his head. Sometimes he came home quiet after court-required dinners with Daniel, but he always came home. That became enough for a while. Enough is not the same as healed. But sometimes, it is the bridge you stand on until the river lowers. Ashford Hall kept deteriorating behind the scenes. Notices appeared in public records. Liens multiplied. The private lender pushed harder. Daniel missed deadlines. Then blamed paperwork. Vivian hosted smaller dinners and pretended intimacy had always been the point. Serena sold jewelry quietly through an estate broker in Charleston, though she told people she was simplifying. Every few months, someone from that world would contact me under the disguise of concern, asking whether Miles understood what it meant to let history be lost. He understood more than they knew. The week he turned 16, Miles asked me to drive past Ashford Hall but not stop. We slowed near the gate at dusk. The oaks still arched over the drive, but the lawn had gone patchy, and one shutter hung crooked on the east wing. Miles looked through the windshield for a long time. "It used to feel huge," he said. "Now it just looks tired." I kept both hands on the wheel and said, "Some places get smaller when you stop being afraid of them." He did not ask to go in. He did not ask about his father. He just nodded. And I drove on. In the rearview mirror, the house disappeared behind the trees. Still standing. Still pretending. I did not know then that Daniel would soon leave Georgia for what he called an investment retreat in Colorado. I did not know he would return months later to a foreclosure notice, a locked gate, and a town full of whispers. And I did not know that by then. Miles would have made the one choice none of them could undo. Daniel left Georgia in March, telling everyone he was meeting investors in Denver who understood historic property restoration better than small-town bankers with no imagination. That was how he described consequences when they wore suits instead of boots. He kissed Serena on the porch for a photo she posted that afternoon, promised Vivian he would return with options, and sent Miles a message saying, "When I fix this, I hope you remember who fought for your legacy." Miles showed it to me without speaking, then deleted it. By then, I had learned that Daniel's disappearances were never empty. He did not leave a room unless he believed someone else would clean it before he returned. While he was gone, Samuel filed formal notices with the trustee records, the court, and the lender, asserting Miles's protected interest in Ashford Hall. The point was not to stop every consequence. Some consequences had already earned their place. The point was to make sure Daniel could not sell, borrow, promise, or perform fatherhood around property that was never fully his. Vivian responded by pretending the law was a social inconvenience. She mailed Samuel a letter on Ashford stationery, accusing him of betraying Arthur's memory, as if Arthur had not been the one who hired him. She called me from 3 different numbers, each time leaving messages about family dignity, Southern decency, and how boys who reject their fathers grow into weak men. I saved every voicemail in a folder named V.A. Contact. Naming things plainly was one of the ways I stayed sane. Serena changed tactics. She stopped posting sunsets and started posting old family photos. Mostly Daniel as a boy beside Arthur. Daniel on horseback. Daniel at Christmas under the grand staircase. Captions appeared about forgiveness, stewardship, and how broken families could still come home. None mentioned me. None mentioned Miles directly. But every woman in Savannah who had ever mistaken gossip for concern knew exactly who she meant. One post ended with, "An heir should never be taught to hate his inheritance." Miles saw it because someone at school showed him. He came home pale, not angry, and asked if he could close his accounts for a while. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Then he sat on the kitchen floor with our old golden retriever, Jasper, who had become too stiff to climb stairs, and whispered into his fur, "I don't want to be a headline in their family." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything Serena had written. The next day, I took Miles to Samuel's office after school. Samuel did not speak to him like a child. And that mattered. He explained what the trust meant, what it did not mean, and what choices Miles would have when he reached 18. He also explained that Daniel and Vivian were not allowed to pressure him for statements, signatures, photographs, or public support. Miles listened with both hands folded between his knees. When Samuel finished, my son asked, "Can I choose not to be found by them right now?" Samuel looked at me before answering. Not for permission, but because he understood the weight of the question. "You cannot disappear from legal responsibilities," he said. "But you can set boundaries. You can use counsel. You can decline direct contact. You can require communication to go through your mother and attorneys." Miles nodded slowly. "Then that's what I want." His voice did not shake. Mine almost did. But I kept still. Sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do is not interrupt a child's first clean no. A week later, Miles wrote a letter in Samuel's conference room. Not a social media statement. Not a performance. A private directive. Witnessed and filed with the appropriate parties. Saying he did not authorize Daniel Ashford, Vivian Ashford, or Serena Vale Ashford to speak on his behalf regarding Ashford Hall, the trust, his inheritance, or his personal wishes. He requested no direct contact about the estate. He stated that any claim of his public support was false unless confirmed through counsel. It was only 2 pages. No insults. No childhood accusations. No dramatic language. But when Samuel finished reading it, he removed his glasses and said, "This is very clear." Miles looked down at his hands and said, "Good." I knew then that the missing heir in Daniel's story would not be a boy lost in the night. It would be worse for him. It would be an heir who had not been stolen, poisoned, or hidden, but who had calmly chosen to be unreachable. Daniel returned at the end of June. I know because my phone lit up at 7:14 inches the morning with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Ashford Hall's front gate. Chained, shut, with a foreclosure auction notice taped beside the call box. Under it, someone had typed, "Your ex is screaming in the driveway." I never found out which neighbor sent it. In Savannah. Discretion has always had cracks when the spectacle is large enough. By 7:40. Daniel had called me 9 times. I let every call go to voicemail. By 8:05. Vivian had called twice. Serena once. And Daniel's lawyer once. At opt doazet shidoy. Daniel left the first message. His voice was not charming. "Claire. Where is Miles?" he said. "This has gone far enough. I came home to my house locked by a lender, and my son unavailable like he's some hostage. Call me back before I make this ugly." I played it twice, then forwarded it to Samuel. Miles was at a summer robotics program in Atlanta. Not hidden. Not abducted. Not manipulated. He had earned a scholarship after months of quiet work at our kitchen table, building circuits beside Jasper's bed while Daniel performed collapse from afar. The program had strict phone rules during the day, which meant that while Daniel shouted into a gate intercom, my son was probably soldering something in a lab with teenagers who knew him as Miles, not as the Ashford heir. That distinction was everything. For the first time in his life, Miles was somewhere Daniel's name did not enter the room before he did. No one asked him about columns, portraits, or whether he intended to save a house he associated with being watched and measured. When I dropped him off, he looked nervous but lighter. Before he walked into the dorm building, he hugged me hard and said, "Don't let them make this my emergency." I promised I would not. Daniel tried every door that day. He went to my old apartment above the bakery. not knowing we had moved 2 months earlier after a pipe burst and the landlord sold the building. He called the school, where the summer office told him nothing. He contacted one of Miles's former coaches, who immediately texted me. He went to Samuel's office and demanded to know where his son was. Samuel's assistant, a woman named Patricia, with a voice like closed mahogany, told him to schedule an appointment through counsel. By noon, Daniel had changed his tone. His next voicemail sounded wounded. Claire, I know we've had disagreements, but this is still my son. I need to see him. The estate is in jeopardy. And if he cares about his grandfather at all, he'll come home. I stood in my office break room, listening with a paper cup of burned coffee in my hand, amazed at how quickly men like Daniel reach for love after money fails. Not before. After that afternoon, Serena appeared again. But not at the bakery. She came to my office. She wore a pale blue dress and no sunglasses this time, which told me she wanted witnesses to read her as sincere. The receptionist called back and said Mrs. Ashford was here to see me. For a moment, the title hit a place I thought had healed. Mrs. Ashford. My old cage. Polished and handed to someone else. Then I stood, smoothed my blouse, and walked out. Serena smiled, as if we were two reasonable women caught between difficult men. Claire, she said. Daniel is beside himself, I answered. That sounds uncomfortable. Her smile thinned. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. This could ruin him. The auction notice is public. Vivian is humiliated. If Miles would simply make one appearance, one statement that he supports his father resolving the matter, the lender may pause. Again. Not fatherhood. Not repair. A photograph. A prop. A boy as collateral with a pulse. I told her Miles was unavailable and would not be making any statement. Serena's eyes hardened. Do you understand what you're doing? That house is his inheritance. I nodded. And he has the right not to be used as a bandage for Daniel's mismanagement. She inhaled sharply. For a second, I saw panic under the resentment. You think this ends with you safe, because you kept documents. Daniel knows people. Vivian knows everyone. They will say you alienated him. They will say you turned the heir against his own name. They can say whatever they want, I said. But they cannot say it for Miles. Serena stared at me like I had slapped her. Maybe I had. In the only language that mattered. Then she whispered. You don't belong anywhere near that family's legacy. I thought of Vivian's stationery, Daniel's smirk, Arthur's shaking handwriting, and Miles on the kitchen floor asking not to be a headline. That legacy is exactly why I left. I said. The emergency came 2 days later through court filings. Not sirens. Daniel petitioned for immediate access to Miles, claiming concern for his welfare and alleging I had concealed him during a family crisis. He attached a statement from Vivian saying Miles had always been deeply attached to Ashford Hall and would never willingly abandon his grandfather's home. Serena submitted her own statement, describing me as calmly hostile and fixated on financial control. I laughed once when I read that phrase. Calmly hostile sounded like what selfish people call a woman who stops begging. Samuel and our family attorney, Rachel Kim, moved faster than Daniel expected. Rachel was compact, sharp-eyed, and allergic to melodrama. She read Daniel's filing, then said, he overreached. Those were beautiful words in a lawyer's mouth. Daniel had not merely asked for visitation. He had tied Miles's emotional welfare to the estate crisis, which opened the door to explaining why the estate crisis existed, why Miles had requested boundaries, and why Daniel's sudden urgency looked less like paternal concern than asset preservation. Rachel asked for everything. The voicemails, the school incident report, Serena's bakery visit notes, Vivian's recorded statement, Daniel's unscheduled pickup attempt, Samuel's trust file, the lender correspondence, the private loan documents showing Daniel had represented his authority too broadly. The posts Serena made about heirs and bitterness. The letter Miles had written requesting no direct estate contact. Piece by piece. The story stopped being my word against a family name and became a pattern with timestamps. The strongest document was not the trust. It was Arthur's letter to Samuel. The one that said, protection, was not betrayal. Rachel read it twice and tapped the page with one finger. This explains intent, she said. Not just ownership. Intent. Arthur had not been confused, sentimental, or manipulated. He had foreseen the exact pressure Daniel and Vivian were applying now. He had protected Miles from being converted into a tool before Miles was old enough to understand the machine. Miles called me that night from Atlanta. He could tell by my voice that something had happened. So I told him the truth in careful language. Daniel had filed something. We were answering it. He was safe. He did not have to leave the program unless he wanted to. There was a long silence. Then Miles said, "Will I have to talk in court?" I closed my eyes. Maybe eventually. But not tomorrow. And never alone. He exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. Then he surprised me. "Mom," he said. "I want them to know I wrote the letter." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Are you sure?" He was quiet for a moment. "They keep acting like I'm missing because you took me." "I'm not missing. I'm gone from them because I chose to be." I pressed my palm to my mouth so he would not hear what that did to me. When I answered, my voice was steady. "Then we will make sure they know." The hearing was set for Friday morning. Daniel arrived with Serena on one side and Vivian on the other. The three of them dressed as if fabric could restore credibility. Vivian wore pearls. Serena wore navy. Daniel wore the same courtroom face he had worn in our divorce conference room. Controlled, and faintly offended by the inconvenience of being questioned. When he saw me, he gave me a look that said he still expected fear to rise on command. I felt fear. I will not lie about that. My hands were cold around the folder in my lap. I had slept 3 hours. I had replayed every mistake I had made in that marriage. Every time I stayed too long. Every time I explained when I should have left the room. But fear is not the same as obedience. That was the lesson Daniel had never learned. A woman can tremble and still refuse you. Rachel leaned toward me before we entered and said, "Stay calm. Let the documents do the work." Across the hallway, Daniel bent close to Vivian while Serena watched me with that careful softness she used when she wanted strangers to think she was kind. Vivian caught my eye and smiled. Not warmly, but victoriously. As if the old order had simply paused and was about to resume. I looked back at her. And for once, I did not look away. The courtroom door opened. Samuel stood behind us with Arthur's file under his arm. Rachel carried Miles's letter. Daniel's voicemails. The trust records. And the private loan documents in a neat stack. Somewhere in Atlanta. My son was not missing. He was in a lab. Building something with his own hands, while the adults who tried to use him were about to learn that an heir can vanish from your control without vanishing from the truth. The hearing lasted less than an hour, but it felt like every year of that marriage had been placed under fluorescent lights. Daniel's attorney began by painting me as a controlling ex-wife who had used a property dispute to separate a father from his son. He said Daniel had returned from business travel to find his family estate in crisis and his child unreachable. He said the word child, like Miles, had not just written a letter clear enough to shame every adult in the room. Rachel did not object to every insult. That was not her style. She let Daniel's side build their little house of noble concern. Brick by brick. Until it looked almost respectable from a distance. Then she stood. Opened her folder. And said, "Your Honor, Mr. Ashford's emergency is not that his son is missing. His emergency is that his son is no longer available to be used as evidence of support for financial decisions, Mr. Ashford had no authority to make." Daniel shifted in his seat. Vivian's pearls moved against her throat as she swallowed. Serena kept her eyes lowered, performing sorrow for anyone who might glance her way. Rachel handed the judge Miles's directive first. Not Arthur's trust. not Daniel's loan papers. My son's words. The judge read in silence while the room held still. I watched Daniel's face as he realized the letter was not mine. Not Rachel's. Not Samuel's. It was Miles, speaking in the only safe way they had left him. Rachel then played Daniel's voicemail from the morning he found the gate chained. His voice filled the courtroom. Angry and careless. Demanding to know where Miles was before he made things ugly. Daniel stared at the table, as if the recording had betrayed him by existing. Then Rachel played Vivian's message about children being raised into obligation. Vivian's cheeks reddened under her powder. For the first time since I met her, she looked less like a matriarch and more like a woman caught saying the quiet part aloud. The judge asked where Miles was. Rachel answered plainly. At a summer robotics program in Atlanta. Your Honor. His mother provided the location to counsel under seal due to the family's repeated direct pressure regarding estate matters. Then she handed over the program acceptance, the scholarship letter, and the dorm contact procedure. No drama. No mystery. Miles was not hidden in some cabin. He was not being brainwashed in a basement. He was learning how to build things in a place where no one called him collateral. Daniel's attorney tried to pivot. He said emotions were high because Ashford Hall had symbolic importance. Rachel nodded once, as if she had been waiting for him to say it. Then she introduced Arthur's trust documents and the letter stating that protection was not betrayal. Samuel testified briefly. His voice measured, explaining that Daniel's authority over the estate was limited and that Miles's interest had been established long before the divorce. Every word landed softly. Softly can still break bone. The private loan documents came next. Daniel had represented himself as having control over more property than the trust allowed. He had used family prestige, old appraisals, and selective paperwork to obtain money that did not preserve the estate. Payments had been missed. Notices had been ignored. Taxes had been delayed. By the time the foreclosure notice appeared on the gate, Daniel had not been fighting for legacy. He had been trying to keep the roof from falling until someone else could be blamed for the dust. Serena's statement became useful in a way she had not intended. Rachel read the line, calling me calmly hostile, and asked Serena whether she had visited my workplace to request that Miles make a public statement supporting Daniel's leadership of the estate. Serena's mouth opened, then closed. She said she had only wanted unity. Rachel asked if unity meant a photograph, a statement, or any documentation useful to a lender. Serena's voice softened into fog. I only wanted to help the family, Rachel said. Which family member asked you to use Miles that way? Serena looked at Daniel. It was quick. But the judge saw it. We all did. Daniel's jaw tightened. And for a moment the performance cracked between them. Vivian whispered something to him. And he shook his head without looking at her. There it was. The whole Ashford machine stalling in public. The mother who demanded obligation. The son who spent what he did not own. The new wife who thought softness could hide ambition. All of them reaching for a boy who had finally stepped beyond their hands. The judge did not give a speech. Real authority rarely needs one. She denied Daniel's emergency request for access outside the existing custody agreement. She ordered that no direct contact be made with Miles regarding Ashford Hall. Inheritance. Foreclosure. Public statements. Family reputation. Or any financial matter. Communication would go through counsel. Any violation could affect future custody and visitation. Then she looked at Daniel and said, A child is not an instrument for stabilizing an adult's financial position. I will remember that sentence for the rest of my life. Not because it was poetic, but because it was clean. Daniel looked as if he had been slapped by language he could not charm. Vivian's hands trembled in her lap. Serena stared at the floor. I sat beside Rachel with my folder closed, feeling no victory in the way people imagine it. There was no music, no applause, no lightning strike. Just a door that had been pushed against my son for years, finally locking from our side. After the hearing, Daniel followed me into the hallway, despite his attorney's warning. Claire, he said. And for the first time in a long time, My name sounded less like an accusation and more like a request. You can't let them take the house. I turned to face him. He looked older than he had in March. Not because months had passed, but because consequences age people faster than time. I'm not letting anyone take anything, I said. You already spent what wasn't yours. His face twisted. Arthur would hate this. Samuel, standing a few feet away, answered before I could. No. Daniel. Arthur expected this. That was the only moment Daniel seemed truly shaken. Not by me. Not by Rachel. Not by the judge. By the idea that his father had seen him clearly and planned around him. Vivian made a small sound. Almost a gasp. But nobody moved to comfort her. Some grief is just pride losing its costume. The foreclosure did not vanish because truth had entered a courtroom. That is not how life works. The lender still had claims. Taxes still had to be addressed. The acreage tied to Daniel's private loan went into a court-supervised process. And Daniel was removed from any active management connected to trust property. Ashford Hall itself was not handed to him. Not handed to me. Not magically restored by a last-minute miracle. It was placed under professional oversight until Miles was old enough to decide what responsibility, if any, he wanted to accept. That outcome disappointed people who wanted a dramatic rescue. It saved my son. That mattered more. The estate was no longer a weapon Daniel could swing by, calling it legacy. Vivian could not host dinners there as if debt were a rumor. Serena could not pose on the porch beneath captions about bitterness. The gate stayed chained while inspectors, attorneys, and preservation officers did their work. For the first time in decades, Ashford Hall belonged less to the loudest person and more to the truth recorded beneath the noise. Daniel's life narrowed quickly after that. The country club membership disappeared. The restored car he loved was sold. Serena stopped posting for 3 months. Then reappeared in Charleston without her wedding ring visible. Vivian moved into a smaller townhouse with drapes too heavy for the windows and told anyone who would listen that modern courts had no respect for family. Daniel sent Miles one message through counsel, asking for a supervised dinner. Miles read it, thought about it for a full day, and declined. I did not celebrate his refusal. I did not encourage it either. I told him the choice was his. That was the point everyone else had missed. Boundaries only heal when they are not another adult's script. Miles was 16. Not fully grown. Not magically cured. Not beyond missing the father he wished he had. Some nights, he still sat quietly for longer than usual. Some mornings he ran too far. Healing did not make him soft. It made him honest. At the end of summer, I picked him up from Atlanta. He came out carrying a duffel bag, a toolbox, and a certificate for a design award he tried to pretend was not important. He had new friends, a sunburn across his nose, and the relaxed exhaustion of a boy who had spent weeks being useful without being used. On the drive home, he asked about the hearing. I told him the order was in place. I told him the house was under oversight. I told him Daniel knew he was not missing. Miles looked out the window for a long time. Good, he said. Then, after a few miles, he added, I don't want him to think I was stolen. I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. He knows. Miles nodded. I want him to know I left. The difference between those two sentences could have split the road open. Stolen meant Daniel could blame me. Left meant he had to face himself. Months later, Samuel arranged for Miles to walk through Ashford Hall with a preservation officer. He asked me to come. But he did not hold my hand when we reached the gate. That mattered too. The chain was gone, replaced by a temporary lockbox. The foreclosure notice had been removed, though a pale rectangle remained on the stone pillar where paper had shielded it from sun and dirt. Houses, remember? Even when people deny everything. Walls keep outlines. Inside, the air smelled stale and old flowers. Dust covered the piano. The grand staircase looked smaller than memory. In the library, Miles stopped in front of Arthur's desk. the same desk where his grandfather had once signed the papers that protected him. He ran one finger along the edge and said, "I don't know if I love this place." Samuel answered gently, "You don't have to know today." I stood in the doorway, watching my son be given what Daniel never offered him: time. Before we left, Miles stepped onto the front porch. The oaks moved lightly in the wind, and beyond them the driveway curved toward the road. He looked neither sentimental nor angry, just present. "Maybe someday it can be something better," he said. "Not ours like a trophy. Something useful. A foundation office. A study center. A place with locked financial controls and open doors for people who did not inherit safety." He did not decide that day, but the thought existed. That was enough. I never got an apology from Daniel. I do not expect one. People who build their lives on entitlement often experience accountability as cruelty. Vivian never admitted Arthur had been right. Serena never confessed she had tried to turn my son into a photograph for a lender. But I stopped needing confession as proof. That was one of the quietest freedoms I ever earned. A lie does not become heavier because the liar refuses to name it. For a long time, I thought peace would feel like winning. I thought it would arrive with a court order, a signed paper, a public humiliation sharp enough to balance the one I endured. But peace was smaller than that. It was Miles, sleeping through the night. It was my phone not lighting up with blocked numbers. It was eating breakfast without rehearsing defenses. It was opening my closet and seeing the metal firebox not as fear, but as a record of the day I finally trusted myself. Family is not proven by who claims you loudest when property is at risk. Love is not measured by portraits, last names, or old columns. A home is not sacred because people with money once stood in it and called themselves respectable. A home becomes sacred when the people inside are safe enough to tell the truth. Ashford Hall had never been that for me. Maybe someday, because of Miles, it would be that for someone else. I still think about Daniel in that conference room, signing the divorce papers with a smirk. He believed he was leaving me with scraps while he kept the name, the house, the history, and the son he only valued when legacy needed a face. He thought silence meant surrender. He thought a woman who did not scream had nothing left. He thought an heir belonged to whoever held the keys, but when he came home, the estate was in foreclosure. The gate was locked, and the heir was missing from every place Daniel expected to find him. Not lost, not stolen, not poisoned against his blood. Just gone from the reach of people who confused control with love. And that was the part Daniel never understood. Sometimes the most powerful heir is the one who refuses to come home. In the end, Ashford Hall was not saved by pride, money, or the people who shouted loudest about family. It was protected by the quiet truth Arthur left behind, by the boundaries Miles finally had the courage to set, and by a mother who stopped confusing silence with surrender. Daniel came home looking for an heir he could use, but he found a locked gate instead. Sometimes the strongest inheritance is not a house, a name, or a fortune. Sometimes it is the freedom to never return to the place that broke you.